Well, thank you very much to Mo Scholars for inviting me down to one of the posher bits of Cornwall. It's like a holiday for me, really, coming down here. Thank you for the presentations which we've had so far. They've been very interesting. I hope this one is too, but sadly it's rather than about any of the real big issues, it's more about me than anything else. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life story and what I've been doing lately. Right, I was born in Cornwall in 1959, so getting on towards the end of the baby boomer generation, that much maligned generation. One of 7 in a farming family. We had an extraordinarily happy childhood, no money at all, but we actually had a brilliant childhood being in a big family on a farm with woods and streams to play in and things to shoot, and including each other from time to time. Just an aside about the money side of things, we really didn't have much money. My mother used to be scandalised when she took us off to the beach because we'd always be going around and scabbing off other people for their sandwiches and that sort of thing, because we felt that theirs were better. You know, ours had Marmite in, and that was about it. My father bought that farm in 1960. He sold a smaller farm near Truro, and he had £3,500 in his pocket, and the farm he bought cost £7,000, so he had to find another 3.5 from the bank. He paid that debt off in the space of 5 years. Now, conservatively, today, the farm value is around about £2 million. If I went to my bank manager and said I'd like to buy it, but I've only got £1 million in my pocket, he would laugh at me and ask me to leave the room. It's just a point, since over the last 50 odd years, the effect of inflation, and that has entered pretty much all of all the aspects of our lives. Anyway, we've been farmers on both sides of my family as far back as any of us can tell, but also been soldiers and policemen as well. I've actually had a very, very mixed sort of career, dabbled with soldiering and policemening myself, both here and abroad, but also I've been lucky enough to work in the forestry industry and also drilling for oil and gas, which is how I know there's X number of litres in a barrel of oil. But really, my background has been very, very firmly in farming. What I have had, though, because I've done lots of different things, is had the luck to get a very broad perspective on a wide range of areas of life. Right, my father died in 1990. I was fortunate enough to spend the last 6 months of his life at home looking after the farm and supporting my parents through a very difficult time. And this period reinforced a prejudice that I already had, that whatever we do as a family, we should not get rid of that farm. Because if we had, yes, we might have all had a few quid in our pockets for a while, but we'd never ever own one again, partly through this inflation aspect. It was not just a recognition of the fact that we should have a farm so that we'd all always have a foothold in food production, but it's also a very strong spiritual attachment as well. And also, farmland, or any sort of land really, is a brilliant hedge against uncertainty. And I'm afraid in 1990, the uncertainty that we're all facing now was beginning to pop up, I think. Anyway, the upshot is that I took over running the farm, mainly because none of my other brothers and sisters wanted to do it. At that point, we had 13 cattle on 170 acres, but we built up a herd of some 270 beef cattle over the next 5 years or so. Now, I'm afraid I'm very bad at sort of doing quick maths. The younger people here, were you alive in 1990? Okay, all right. Do you remember BSE and being told not to eat beef burgers and that sort of thing? Well, BSE struck properly in 1996. At that stage, we had a herd of cattle worth something like £150,000 on the hoof. When the BSE hit, that went from being a commodity we could have turned into cash into something we could turn into nothing. It was just valueless overnight, and it took a long time to come back from that. Anyway, the upshot really was it showed me that our farming operation was very vulnerable to shock, but also it made me realise I better get a job real quick. I was very lucky to get a job in the oil industry. I went to work for an American oilfield service company that was based in Aberdeen, and they quite like farming people because they were already familiar with noisy machinery and working with animals, that sort of thing, so I would have fitted in on an oil rig okay, and they sent me off to Houston to learn to be a drilling fluids engineer. I'm absolutely outstanding. If any of you at any time find yourselves at a loose end, we'll still be drilling for oil despite all the doom and gloom about the thing. We'll still be drilling for it in another 20 years' time, don't worry. And if ever you want a late entry career, it's not a bad one. Anyway, there were a couple of excellent things about that. One is it pays quite good money, and the other thing was it gave me half my time at home. So I was able to still keep making the farm a little bit more future-proof as we went along, and actually having something to live on. In 2003, we converted to a fully organic system, really just because we'd done all the work that we needed to be organic, and we just ran out of excuses not to do it. So we did that. It's not that I'm a particularly strong believer in the organic system per se, but it does help sort of situate the way that we were thinking in the marketplace. We were now running considerably fewer cattle than we had been 10 years before, by the way, probably about a third of the number as previously. But also we converted some old farm buildings into a study centre for schools and colleges, and quite a big part of our work for 6 months of the year is hosting schools and college trips there for them to learn about farming. Anyway, as we went along and we were doing more work with schools and colleges, I was thinking more and more about how we ought to be viewing the world and how we should be altering the way we farm to really be prepared for the changes that are inevitably on the way. It became very apparent to me that we're responsible for a whole range of things. It's not just, farmers are not there just to produce milk or meat or potatoes. Firstly, we're responsible for clean air, obviously clean food, clean water, clean recreational opportunities, cleaner habitat for biodiversity to thrive, and so on, clean energy even. There are lots of things that farmers can do that most people don't have the opportunity to do, but it is a long and growing list. Some of it are things that you don't get paid to do, but some of the things are actual opportunities as well. Anyway, to do all these things effectively, we had to reappraise the way we farmed and to start to look at what our ecosystem actually lets us do. An awful lot of farming today is not really designed to work with the ecosystem we have. It's designed to do what the hell you can get away with by applying a maximum amount of chemicals and horsepower to it. So at that stage, really up until about 4 years ago, we were doing mixed farming. We were growing cereal crops and grass. And the cereals we grew, we would be feeding to our cattle, which is a very traditional way of farming, and it's a way to actually rotate the land that you have. So you're going through a series of years growing cereals and then back into grass and then back into cereals again and so on. And there are lots of good reasons for doing that. But I just began to question how this can work when we no longer have lots of diesel and lots of chemicals to throw around. Because, sure as eggs are eggs, you can invest 6 months of time and a lot of money into ploughing a field and planting a crop of barley and nurturing it along and getting it right to the point where you want to combine it, and it'll start pissing down a rain for the next 3 weeks when you should be harvesting it. And you can get away with it in current terms because you harvest it and then you dry it with natural gas, but clearly that's not going to work forever. And then we reappraised why we were growing it at all in the first place. We're growing it for cows to eat. Now, cows love eating cereals. I think they get a bit of a buzz off it, and they do grow faster. But they're not designed to eat it. They're designed to eat grass. And they can, if you grow the grass right, they can actually grow pretty satisfactorily just off grass. So we binned the cereals. And the other thing about it is of course, under grass, land starts to accumulate carbon. And if we're concerned about the level of carbon in the atmosphere, we should be doing whatever we could to sequestrate it. It's no good, you know, if we stopped making any emissions now, today, we would still need to go through 100 years or so to bring us back down to carbon levels sort of pre-industrial revolution. So we have to be using our land in a way that actually sucks up carbon. And grassland is a very, very efficient way of doing this, arguably more so than putting it under woodland. So we're there busy sequestering lots of carbon, and we're growing this grass. And I was then thinking, now what about the grass itself? Is what we're doing using sort of traditional kind of types of grass and herbage, is this doing the best that we can be, both for the cattle and also for the soil? And reading a variety of old books and speaking to a few old timers and so on, we realised that we should be changing the kind of grass that we grow as well. So we have commenced, and it's going to take us 10 years to complete it, but going around the farm slowly, bit by bit, putting in new grass and new herbs. So such that the herbs, the whole mixture is a lot more palatable for the animals, and such that some of it is self-medicating. So the cows eat a particular plant there called chicory, for example, which is full of tannin, and tannin is very good for killing off stomach worms. So the cows are actually self-medicating as we go along. Another useful thing about the new varieties things we're using is that they root very deeply. So we've got a farm which is, in normal terms, almost a two-dimensional playing space in terms of soil, because most of the agricultural grasses and herbs only go down about 4 or 5 centimetres into the soil, whereas the things we're using are actually going down to about 1 metre or so. And so we've just increased the volume of space we can store up carbon in by a factor of 20. And we carry out a carbon audit every year, which is based on what we're growing and on soil samples. And it is looking like we are sequestering about 300 tonnes across the 170 acres per year. That's part of that is going into trees, some of it's going into hedgerows, but the biggest single factor is it's going into soil. And that is a net figure. That's after all the cows have belched and farted out their methane. It's after all of the electricity we use for all the school trips that come. It's after all the showers and all the rest of it, and so on and so forth. It's the whole the whole bill, if you like, for carbon is 300 odd tonnes per annum in our favour at the moment. And then we also sort of looked around a little bit as well 4 years ago and thought, well, it's fine for us to be sitting on a farm and just sort of drowning in fillet steak and so on. What about our neighbours? And we have a village on one boundary, and we thought that going forward, as it has many modern houses without gardens, we should provide some space for them to grow food. So we've set up an allotment scheme in that village, which is very well subscribed. And it's not just giving people an opportunity to come and hire a piece of land and grow their own vegetables and so on, but it's also made a kind of a social conduit between us and them, because these are people that in the normal run of life we would never meet, which I think is going to pay dividends in the long run. Besides actually being able to farm more sensitively, I hope, though we also need to be thinking about how we market our produce too. And here we come to the weaknesses, really. We do sell in 2 local markets, 2 village markets, one in Grampan Road and one in Laddock, but it's really small quantities of material. We do supply 1 or 2 local shops, local bed and breakfasts as well. And we do supply ourselves. You know, if you've got 40 children in for a barbecue, you know, that's a lot of sausages and burgers to go through, and we do quite a lot of that. So we are using some of it on site. But still, with a herd of cattle, for example, we might be using 1 or 2 out of 30 odd beasts a year like that, and the rest of it is still just going into the normal, if you like, organic chain, and it goes off on an unacceptably long trip on a lorry to a slaughterhouse, and then off into the likes of Sainsbury's and so on for retailing. Which I just find, you know, really sad in this day and age, and it just strikes me as being, in the long run, unsustainable. So anyway, that's a very long-winded way of getting round to what I think the one thing that you should do, and that is, I think if you possibly can, you should get close to a farmer. Farmers have everything you need. You know, they produce meat, they can produce vegetables and fibre and milk and leather and all of those things that you need. If there's any way at all that we can start to beat the supermarket monopoly, we have to be shortening supply chains. And the shortest possible way is to go right to the source. Farmers are all individuals, and you'll find some who don't want to know, but I'm sure more and more as time goes by that there are people out there who would actually like to meet their public and be doing more directly with them. It'd be good to understand how he does his business and the sort of pressures he's under, and it would certainly do him a lot of good to understand what other people's pressures and so on are as well. And I really sincerely believe this, that the local customers and local suppliers are going to become absolutely the way business is done in our post-carbon world, which is, you know, it's coming. I'll see some of it, a little bit of it, the first bit, but you guys, when you're my age, that will be the world you live in. So beat the rush, meet a farmer. Thank you very much indeed.
Any questions? I was wondering, as you run an organic farm and so on, how feasible do you think it would be to convert the current farming methods in England? Obviously, you'd have to persuade the farmers and so on, but do you reckon it would be feasible from an economic point of view to be able to produce enough? Like, is it efficient enough to produce enough to supply the demand in England? Because I've heard very varying arguments, so I'm a bit at a loss.
I think we can produce enough food in England for the people we have, but a certain amount of that is going to fall on the people themselves, if you like. Allotment gardening, if it's done well, is about the most productive way to produce food that we have in the country. So the way I see it is there will continue to be let's say large-scale kind of agriculture going on, but I think for an awful lot of people, perhaps not now, but give it 20 years, they will be producing a significant amount of their calories themselves in allotment-type situations. Now, that's very, very easy to say, but to try and make that happen with Birmingham or London or whatever, that's a real headache. But times are changing, and I think already there are signs from big urban centres all over the world that people are beginning to get their head around urban agriculture. And look at a place like Detroit, which is in very sharp decline industrially, and it's a city where city blocks are being converted back into farming.
So as an aquaculture kind of farming setup, where they use water and fish to help fertilise plants?
In Detroit, no, they bulldoze city blocks and start farming. But in New York City, for example, yeah, there's a lot of that going on as well. Yeah.
In the University of the Third Age, we have lots and lots of members. One of our members had a paddock, and he has let it out to 13 of our members as an allotment field. And this has been immensely popular. As you know, there's a shortage of allotment spaces in many areas, and all his field has been gobbled up, and everybody is very enthusiastic about it. I was going to ask you, we had a talk a little while back by somebody who runs the feeding for Treliske Hospital and the other hospital services, and the essence of his talk was that an effort was being made to buy in food directly from local farmers, meat, milk, vegetables, I think, into the hospital kitchen, so that the food was all fresh and local, and great lorries had not been trundling down the A30 belching their petrol fumes. I don't know if this is still going on. He was very enthusiastic about this scheme at the time.
I understand that is still going on, but you know, it's just one facet, perhaps, of the way we are slowly heading. I don't see there's any way around it. You know, what we forget is when we talk about 80% drop in carbon and so on, the impact that's going to have on transport. Yeah, that's going to be absolutely enormous. We've all talked about, you know, having a few less showers and so on. You watch where goods come from. That's going to be really important. And this is perhaps beginning to look at the Achilles heel of the supermarkets. The supermarkets have done what they've done by being superlative distributors. Their logistics are second to none. They make armies look fairly amateur. They're brilliant. Now, that's fine when diesel fuel and so on is cheap. We could end up, I think one of our biggest problems is for the government, if they want to sort out the food situation, if food starts to become scarce or difficult to move around, it'll be very easy for them to bring in 6 supermarket bosses and talk to them and lay the law down to them. It'll be very, very hard for them to bring in 60,000 farmers and say, right, this is how you've got to do business. So that's something we have to be very alert to. You know, as things get tight, governments, even democratic ones, tend to get quite bossy and tell us how things are going to be. And I think for all of our sakes, we need to try and avoid that like the plague. And we have to be thinking about our own solutions. So really, in a nutshell, we have to be designing and working local solutions before it does all fall off the rails and the supermarkets making deals with the government about how things get done. Yeah.
Are there local farming associations? I don't really know the setup, but do farmers in any way subscribe to like local farming associations?
There are lots and lots and lots of groups of farmers around doing all sorts of different things. I belong to one called the Pasture Fed Livestock Association, and we're particularly interested in growing meat, milk, and wool and so on off grass. And that's a very new one, and we've probably got I don't know, 40 or 50 members scattered across the country, but there's potential for that to grow. There's something called the National Farmers Union. Don't touch them with a barge pole, would be my advice. They're very, very heavily dominated by, let's say, the top 1 or 2% who own a lot of land, and they are deeply, deeply embedded in industrial farming. If you want GM, vote for the NFU. Yeah.
For general information,
yeah.
You mentioned about many of the projects that are happening in, say, Detroit or aquaponics in New York.
Yeah.
There's a really good website which has a lot of very short films on it, with many of these projects around the world, but not just farming, everything from water projects in Africa. And the website's well worth looking at and just scrolling through some of the short films, because they're all very positive films. And it's called Next World TV. So if you just Google on that, you can keep you busy for hours. And you come away feeling that there are things that can be done.
Yeah, also the TED Talks as well.
TED Talks are great.
Which are brilliant. Yeah. And again, on a very, very wide variety of subjects. Okay. Right, thank you very much indeed.